Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the president of Alexander Muss High School in Israel, Susan Sachs.
Okay, let's talk about good things that are happening. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to stand before you as the president of Alexander Muss High School in Israel. Like all Jewish parents, I need to tell you how proud I am of my children. Well, adult children. No, that's not quite right. I need to tell you how proud I am of our children. These kids, these teens, embody resilience, leadership, maturity, and an unwavering pride in their Judaism, Jewish identity, and Zionism. Our teens at Muss are now coming of age in a post-October 7th world. They may be academically successful. Many have and will participate in activities in and outside of their schools. Many are very committed to helping a variety of social causes. And they come from everywhere, rural communities, urban communities, and suburbia across America. Some openly express their Judaism, are members of youth movements, love their Jewish summer camp, while others hide it and they shy away from open displays of their Jewish identity. October 7th forced our teens to face a new reality. And while they come from different communities, so many of them describe similar experiences now. Our teens are being singled out by their peers, being removed from friend groups, and even taunted at schools responsible for their safety, well-being, and of course, their academics. I've heard from teens right now on our program that they've experienced harassment and isolation. Schools seem to just be more concerned about offending the attackers than protecting those being attacked. While our teens propose dialogue, their peers are advocating bullying them into silence. And I wish I was just speaking about some isolated incidents, or that maybe I only heard from one or two teens. These stories are real. I heard last week when I was on campus that they are growing in frequency and intensity. These teens, our teens, have decided to take action in the aftermath of October 7th. They will not be silent. They need to understand Israel and all of its complexities at this moment. They've exponentially increased their desire to deepen their knowledge and connection to Israel. And even as some of them face schools who opposed such a semester abroad, they came anyway. Muss stands as a beacon of light, a haven for them and for the future of global Jewry, committed to a mission of fostering a love for Jewish identity and the land and the people of Israel. This is not an academic pursuit just for the sake of learning, but it is a journey that embodies the understanding, appreciation, and the importance of Israel to the Jewish people. As our teens all over the states face growing challenges with the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments, the need for Muss has never been more urgent. At Muss, we believe in empowering every single teen to explore their Judaism, in a very personal and meaningful way, develop their own relationship with their love of Israel, and become independent and thoughtful leaders. You heard this directly from the two young alum this morning, as well as Wendy Sachs, who stand as a prime example of how MUS has produced alumni who go on to become future Jewish leaders. A MUS experience isn't just an antidote to the growing hostility towards Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. MUS is the foundation upon which the future of our Jewish people can stand strong. MUS is the answer. Let me say it again. MUS is the answer. So here's a challenge. I encourage all of you to learn directly from our alumni what a profound impact the MUS experience has had on their lives. They're sitting among you. You see them on their little tags. They say MUS alum. And we have many alum participating in high school and college summits. Seek out a MUS alum at some point during the next 2 days. Talk to them. Hear about the impact of their experience in Israel with MUS. I believe you will indeed see MUS is the answer. Thank you all. To keep us going here, please welcome to the stage Jewish National Fund USA President of JNF Future, Ian Sachs.
Thank you, Susan. I met my beautiful wife, Alexa, 12 years ago. On our first date, we talked about what we each wanted our families to look like. With 7 siblings between the two of us, it was apparent that we each wanted really large families. Fast forward to today, we have 3 beautiful children. Children are the heart of Jewish continuity. One day in the not too distant future, our children will be handed the torch, which we received from our parents, grandparents, and ancestors to continue writing the history of our people. Just over a year ago, it felt as though we were handing that torch to the next generation at an extraordinary time. The golden age of American Jewry felt like it was very much a simple fact of life in the diaspora. Israel's economic might, relative peace, and emerging allies through treaties like the Abraham Accords offered a glimpse of a new Middle East. Yet, in the aftermath of October 7th, the resurgence of anti-Semitism and Jewish isolation has given us all a pause. What kind of world are we really leaving to our children? What place will the Jewish community in Israel have in this new world order? What is our role as American Jews? To help us explore these questions, I am honored to introduce this session's speaker, Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi Wolpe is known and beloved by so many in this room and around the world. He serves as a visiting scholar at Harvard Divinity School and rabbinic fellow with the Anti-Defamation League. He's also the Max Webb Emeritus Rabbi of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, and a senior advisor to the Maimonides Fund. Rabbi Wolpe has also authored 8 books, including national bestseller, Making Loss Matter, Creating Meaning in Difficult Times. All of this has earned him a spot on the Jerusalem Post's list of 50 most influential Jews in the entire world, and we are thrilled to have him here with us today. In our session, Rabbi Wolpe will begin by sharing his perspective, after which we'll do a little fireside chat here up on the stage so that he can answer questions that were submitted by many of you beforehand. With that, please welcome to the stage Rabbi David Wolpe.
So the rabbi's talking to the doctor. How do you know it's a joke? The doctor says, you know, Rabbi, I don't like to brag, but when I treat patients, if I know they can't afford it, I do it for free. The rabbi thinks for a minute, he goes, I do that. The doctor says, well, when I write prescriptions, I make sure that they have adequate insurance. And I will even make calls to the insurance company on their behalf to make sure they do so that they don't have to pay. The rabbi thinks for a minute, he goes, I do that. Now, doctor's getting frustrated. He says, when I do surgery, I make sure that the hospital doesn't charge them over the insurance so that they have surgery for free. And the rabbi says, I do that. The doctor says, Rabbi, with all due respect, you don't have patients, you don't write prescriptions, and you certainly don't do surgery. And the rabbi says, oh, no, 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 I mean, I say nice things about myself too. Which brings us, of course, to the Jewish people. Because you know and I know that when a people or a person says nice things about themselves, it also covers a deep insecurity, or they wouldn't feel compelled to do it. Why is it that every single week I get a list of Jewish Nobel Prize winners? It's because we are asking at the same time, if we've done so much, why do so many people hate us? It's extraordinary for a people that is supposed to be skilled in business. Jews have gotten a very poor ROI on our investment in the world. Because here we are, and we have given the world so much, and yet. So I want to begin by talking about the fact that we know we have political challenges both here in the United States, we have political challenges in Israel, we have political challenges in Europe, and there is no one clear solution to whatever political position the Jewish people or parts of the Jewish people should take in order to make our future better. But we can diagnose part of the problem and understand a certain dynamic in Jewish history that I think will help a little bit. So first of all, I want to start with anti-Semitism. Jews sometimes don't understand how it is that this thing came about. It's almost like, why don't you like us? We're really very nice. And the first thing to understand is that the deepest root of anti-Semitism is not about Jews, it's about human nature. It is about the distrust of the other. I always tell people, if you think that human beings are basically always good and love the other, you should visit a playground. What happens when a new kid comes on the playground? Do the other kids say, oh, look, a new child. Let us share our toys with him. No, it's get the new kid. And for most of Jewish history, we were the ones who said no. We will not be like you. We refuse. We are the other. And no matter how much the world pressed us to give up our otherness, we wouldn't do it. And some of the world's hostility in return was precisely because we were always what is now become fashionable, which is we had a separate identity at a time when everyone was supposed to be the same. This was then supercharged by a family quarrel. Because the truth is that the early fights between Jews and Christians were fights between family, because all the early Christians were Jews. And I know it may not be true for you, but as a rabbi, I can tell you, having witnessed it, that family quarrels are sometimes the meanest, and when they get put in a sacred book and last for thousands of years, it is not good. And we should not disregard how much those thousands of years of theological animosity still play some role. When I was at Harvard, and actually, although I was introduced as being still there, I know this is sad for you, I have since left. It's funny, as I left, nobody said, no, 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 stay, please, stay. But when I was there, the first thing you know about the Divinity School and about Harvard in general is that it has a history of anti-Semitism, and that history is born of Christianity. And this idea that Christianity supercharged some of the anti-Semitism of the West is precisely why we are so grateful that we live in such a miraculous age when some of the very best friends and supporters of the Jewish people are Christians. And we should thank them and thank God, because to our ancestors that would have been inconceivable, and to us it is just a blessing. But the three forms that I saw there and that you see around the world of anti-Semitism on the right, anti-Semitism on the progressive left, and Islamism, radical Islam and its ideology, are a very, very potent mix. And they show up in the kinds of anti-Semitism that actually strikes a historical echo, because although anti-Semitism is different from other hatreds, it is not different from itself. So one of the things that characterizes anti-Semitism is that Jews are both subhuman and superhuman. The Nazis saw us as vermin that control the world, because at the heart of anti-Semitism is almost always a conspiracy theory. We control the world, we control the media, we run Hollywood, we run the banks. I don't have to tell you. We all have secret cabals of groups that get together and decide what the world is. The fact, by the way, that we lost a third of our people in a massacre in the 20th century ought to alert people that if we're running the world, we're doing a very poor job of it, but it doesn't seem actually to take. And so you still get that today, that in fact Jews are secretly in charge of everything that is happening. And here is where I want to give you one framework to think about this and kindred things that have happened not only since October 7th, but since the beginning almost of Jewish time. So we just, a week and a half ago, read of Abraham's initial mission, Lech Lecha, where God comes to Abraham and sends Abraham and Sarah forward. And by the way, just as a romantic aside, God says to Abraham, Lech Lecha, and Lecha is actually singular. You know, you can't say singular you in English. I can say you, and I could be talking to one person or all of you, but in Hebrew, if you say Lecha, you're only talking to Abraham. But when God says, Abraham, you go, he goes with Sarah because she's part of who he is, which is a beautiful idea and ought to apply to the entire Jewish people. But I'm going to get to unity in a second. The rabbis say, how is it that Abraham knew who God was? And there are lots of stories. There's a story about Abraham and his father's idol shop, and there's a story about Abraham worshiping the sun and then the moon and realizing neither one was God, but that's not the one I want to tell you. The rabbis say Abraham saw the world as a palace, and that palace was doleket. I'll come back to that word in a second. And when he saw that, he said, does no one take responsibility for this place? At which point, God comes out of the heavens and said, don't worry, it's mine. Now, the great thing about that story is that the word doleket can mean full of light or full of fire. In other words, maybe Abraham saw the world as enchanted, and maybe he saw the world as anguished, or maybe both. And that's the story of Jewish history. Part of what we are sometimes subject to is this dolorous, sad, tearful recounting of how everyone hates us, and we suffered, and we suffered, and we suffered, and we barely survived, and now we are here. But that is not Jewish history. When you read the Bible and you read about the Hivites and the Hittites and the Jebusites, and you think, if I could find a Jebusite and tell him, by the way, in thousands of years, there won't be any Jebusites left. But you see, that tiny group of Israelites, they're still going to be here. He would say probably the same thing as the Roman Empire would, and the Babylonian Empire, and the Assyrian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, which is, no, you don't understand. The sun never sets on our empire, except it does. It just never sets on the Jew. And that recognition ought to give us enormous chizuk, enormous strengthening. It's why Ben-Gurion said that any Jew who doesn't believe in miracles isn't a realist. When you look at Jewish history, it is astonishing, unprecedented, and literally unbelievable that we should be here. And so the first obligation of a Jew who wants to fight for Judaism is have the faith in the idea that we are not going anywhere. If we were going to disappear, we could have done it 1,000 times. But that's not who we are. We were promised something beyond that, and we have lived it again and again and again. And one of the ways that we do that is because Jewish values involve several things that actually we need to keep reminding ourselves, because some of these values are countercultural. First of all, a tremendous Jewish value is courage. Ivri, Hebrew, which is applied to Abraham, comes from aver, which means over. So the rabbis say because Abraham was on one side of the world and everyone else was on the other. And do you know what courage it takes to stand alone in the world? And again and again and again, you realize what courage it took for Jews to say, I refuse, I won't be like you. In fact, you may not know this story, but it's worth knowing. Before the catastrophes of the 20th century, everybody spoke about the greatest catastrophe in recent Jewish history being the pogrom in Kishinev. It drove a lot of immigration from Russia to the United States. And when the Zionist Congress was trying to decide whether they would take land in Africa that the British had offered them, right? The Peel Commission said to Weizmann at one point, the British Peel Commission, why don't you just take this land? It was called the Uganda Plan. It's actually probably mostly Kenya now, but still. Why don't you take this land? And Weizmann's answer was, sir, that's like my asking you why you drove 50 kilometers to visit your mother last week when there are so many lovely old ladies on your street. In other words, Israel is ours. And so they went to the Zionist Congress and they voted on the Uganda Plan. And they came to the delegates from Kishinev when the blood was still running in the streets. It was just a couple months afterwards, and they said, do you want to save your community right now by going to Uganda? And the delegates said, no. No. Israel is our home. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that no other country in the world, none, is targeted for elimination. Nobody says, look, Germany fought 2 world wars, let's get rid of Germany. The Chinese are mistreating the Uyghurs, let's get rid of the Chinese. Myanmar, look what they're doing to the Rohingya, we should end Myanmar. No, the only country in the world that people say should no longer exist happens to be the only country in the world that is inhabited by people who've been hated for thousands of years. Isn't that a coincidence? So the ability to stand against that, to have that courage, is indispensable for Jews, but it is not the only virtue that you need to move forward. We also need the humility to be able to listen. Humility is a religious virtue. It is recognizing that you are not the be-all and end-all, that you're not the best thing going. One of the reasons why the Talmud preserves the arguments of the minority is because, guess what? No matter how certain you were of your vote, it is possible the other guy is right. And maybe in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you'll look back and say, maybe I wasn't right. And humility is incredibly important because without it, we will not listen to each other. C.S. Lewis, the theologian, had a great definition of humility. He said, it's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It's giving other people the space to enter. And the fundamental religious disposition is gratitude. Do you know what the word Jew means? It comes from Yehuda, which means to be grateful to God. In your name, if you are Jewish, is gratitude. The first words you speak in the morning are modeh ani, I am grateful to you. And you know, if you are sitting here, Jewish or not Jewish, that you are among the 99.9% luckiest people who have ever lived. And if you are Jewish, you know that your ancestors would give anything to have even the difficult problems that we have. Yes, we have those who hate us, but yes, we have a voice to rise against them. Yes, we have people who are hostile to Israel, but yes, we have an Israel. And so part of the way forward is to remind ourselves every single day that we have the tools to fight. We are not alone. We have friends, we have allies. I will tell you a secret about Jews that's not so secret. We are so much better at identifying our enemies than we are at embracing our allies. But those non-Jews who, for example, are at this conference, God bless them. We should be so grateful. Because if you think it takes courage to stand up as a Jew, imagine how much courage it takes to stand up for a Jew. So we have to remember, we are not alone, we are not powerless, we are not wandering, we are not in the predicament of our ancestors. And then just one more virtue. And I wish Jews would remember this. When you speak as a Jew, from the depth of the tradition, you speak to the world. Natan Sharansky, when he escaped from the Soviet Union, he wrote this book, Fear No Evil, and he said in the Soviet Union there were 2 kinds of Jews. There were Jews who decided they had to free the world. They became communists and ended up enslaving half the world. And then there were Jews who decided they had to free Jews. They became refuseniks and ended up liberating the Soviet Union. The most universal institution in the world, like it or not, is the United Nations, and when it wants to express its universal values, what does it do? It puts on the front a quote from Isaiah. Lo yisa goy al goy cherev lo yilmedu al milchama. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. When the world wants to express itself, it does so in a Hebrew accent. When I was a kid growing up in Philadelphia, they used to take us to the Liberty Bell. And there on the Liberty Bell, what do you have? A verse from Leviticus. Proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. We speak Jewish, and it is universal. As Cynthia Ozick says in a beautiful metaphor, look at the shofar. It has a narrow end and a broad end. If you start off blowing in the broad end, you get nothing. But if you start off blowing in the narrow end, you get a sound that everyone can hear. So yes, we are lucky, and yes, we are universal, and yes, we should be grateful. And especially we should be grateful in this great and good land. 2 years ago, we were celebrating Simchat Torah in the streets of Westwood in Los Angeles. And we're walking around the streets and we're singing and the kids are having a great time. And this Persian woman, a member of my congregation, comes up to me and she is weeping, really crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Nothing is wrong. But do you know, growing up in Iran, I could never have dreamed that I could dance with the Torah in the streets." So whatever you think is going on, politically otherwise, in addition to the gratitude we have for being Jews and being in 2024 and not elsewhere in Jewish history, we have an unbelievable debt to the United States of America. So, the first thing I want to tell you in the closing lapse of this talk is I want to recall something that my father told me about the founding of the State of Israel. Because when I say that we have allies, and when I say we're in a different time, we also have something else. My father was a rabbinical student in 1948. And he was gathered with all of his friends and lots of other people outside of Madison Square Garden. In those days, you slept overnight, not for the Taylor Swift concert, but for the founding of the State of Israel. And then cultural shifts. But behind him was an old man who had a tattoo on his arm from the camps. And when they opened the doors in the morning, everybody ran in to get a seat to watch the UN vote in Madison Square Garden. And as my father and his friends sat down, they were amazed to see that that man sat right behind them. And my father said, "I was so worried about you. I was afraid you were going to trample with all these people. How did you make it?" And the man said to him, "Because I wasn't running alone." Remember that our ancestors, they're with us and they're watching us. When we stand up for Judaism, for Jews, and for Israel, we're not only doing it for us, and we're not even only doing it for our kids. We're doing it for our ancestors. We're doing it because they couldn't do it. We're realizing their dream. And we're doing it so that when our grandchildren do it, they'll be able to look back at us with pride and not with shame. I know there is a lot to discuss, and I don't want to take all my time just talking at you instead of having a dialogue. And so I want to tell you this story that I've told at every opportunity since October 7th, because I think it is the story of the Jewish people, even though it's not from October 7th, And it's not from the modern times, it's from our history. But it still expresses better than anything I know who we are. So you may or may not know this, but even though Judaism does in fact talk a good deal about Olam Haba, the world to come, we don't really discuss an afterlife as much as some other traditions do. Part of it is because who knows? Who can imagine what a world would really be like? Mark Twain, in his book Letters from Earth, says people think after they die they're going to lie on green fields and listen to harp music. He said, you would not want to do that for 5 minutes while you're alive, so I don't understand why you think you're going to be happy doing that for the rest of eternity after you die, but okay. But we do have this idea of Olam Haba, and there is an idea of a punishment after death. It's not like you get off scot-free if you're a terrible person, and we even have a name for that place. Gehenna. What you may or may not know is that Gehenna was a real place, is a real place. The Valley of Hinnom, right outside of the walls of Jerusalem. And in ancient times, Canaanites would sacrifice children in the Valley of Hinnom, and when the Israelites, when the Jews saw that, they called it hell. About 50 years ago, some Israeli archaeologists were excavating in the Valley of Hinnom. And they came upon a house that was destroyed at the destruction of the first temple. That's 586 BCE. That's 600 years before the Dead Sea Scrolls, 600 years before the Common Era. And in that house, they found the oldest bit of Torah that exists in the world. Hundreds of years older than any other bit of scroll we have. 2 rolled up silver amulets that survived destruction. So what is this bit of Torah that survived destruction? You can see it, by the way, if you go to the Israel Museum. They unrolled these amulets, and inside they found the following. Yevarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God bless you and keep you. May God's countenance shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God be with you and give you peace. In other words, the oldest bit of Torah in the world is a blessing of peace that was snatched from hell. If you ask me in one sentence, what have the Jewish people done with all that was given them again and again and again? I'm not sure there's a better description. We have faced tremendous trials, spiritual, emotional, physical. We have wandered all over this world. We have tried desperately to keep our children with us in all sorts of different ways, through all sorts of different situations where they might be moved to float away. And through it all, we have managed somehow to hold on to this blessing of peace, even in the midst of hell. We who at the moment have a voice and have agency and have power, we who have determination and purpose and mission, we who have a covenant of fate for everything we have gone through, but also a covenant of destiny for everything we can do together. We have it in our hands to ensure that the Jewish future is greater and brighter and better than the past. To make sure that the state of Israel is stronger than it was yesterday or the day before or last year or God knows in 1948 or on October 7th. If, in the midst of the destruction of Jerusalem, we can preserve this blessing in the worst of times, then we can do it today. That's why you're here, because you believe in the blessing, you believe in the future, because you believe in the Jewish people. Thank you.
Yes. Mike's on. Rabbi, that was absolutely incredible, to say the least. Thank you for being with us here today.
Sure. Thank you. I want to thank you for the blue chairs. It's very thematic to what I was wearing. I can't believe you planned that. That was Russell. Oh, Marcy. It had to be Marcy. It wasn't Russell.
Yeah, I got the memo, too. I have what feels like about 50 questions that have been sourced from the audience, everyone in here. I could talk to you for hours, but we only have about 20 minutes. So I'd like to start and ask you a couple questions from the room and just to have a chat about it. You recently wrote in the Jewish Journal, "I went to Harvard believing in the promise of America, and I have returned home believing even more deeply." How did your experience with anti-Semitism at Harvard deepen your commitment to Jewish resilience, and what can we learn from your experience in today's climate?
Okay, so without presuming that you know what my experience was, I'll give you 2 seconds on it. I retired from my synagogue, and you know, when you retire from a synagogue, a lot of people say there's a sense of, I can't believe you're leaving us. But I took a 1-year position as a scholar in residence at Harvard Divinity School, and that made it all better. Where are you going? I'm going to okay, well, you're going to Harvard. I mean, that's... When I came back after the first time I came back, after I said, we can't believe you left us for Harvard, because, as you know, first of all, I was on the anti-Semitism committee. We really tried to make changes. The institution was not amenable to the changes we made, to say the least. And so I resigned just because I knew that I was lending credibility to an enterprise that I didn't believe in myself. And what was encouraging to me was, first of all, that so many people, millions and millions of people, saw the resignation, which I never imagined would be true, and that the Jewish community at Harvard and those who supported it really stood up to. I mean, the furor that swept America was as important as the fact that it happened in the first place. We tend to focus only on the fact that it happened at Harvard, at Columbia, at Penn, at Berkeley, I could go on and on. But the anger and the disgust and the sense of this is not what we want our world to be, that was as important as the initial stimulus. So I felt like, in fact, this showed me that there were many, many people who felt exactly as I did, which was that this almost total absence of values was not what Harvard should represent or what America does represent.
You wrote in the Times of Israel about finding a refuge in faith, noting that Judaism offers the strength to remain faithful in a storm. How can we as Jews, as well as our allies beyond our faith, connect to this sense of refuge, especially during these trying times?
I have 2 separate suggestions for you. One is, it's really hard to stand alone in a storm. As Ecclesiastes Kohelet puts it, a threefold cord is not easily broken. In other words, you have to find a community. You have to find people. You don't have to agree about everything, but you have to find people that will stand with you about the things that you think are most important in this world. And so that's why, I mean, it won't surprise you, I'm a huge advocate of synagogues. I think synagogues are incredibly important because they create community and they sustain community for years and years and years and years. When people are in trouble in a synagogue, they can be supported and helped until they don't need help anymore. And there aren't many institutions in American life, if any, where you know it will still be there for your children and your grandchildren. And then I have advice about social media. And I say this as somebody who posts on X and posts on Facebook and posts on Instagram and on and on and on. You have to know how it affects you. You really do, and you have to be honest with yourself. If you're the kind of person who, first of all, gets meaner or gets triggered or gets angry or gets hurt, turn it off. Turn it off. You don't have to look at it. It does not have to be the first thing you look at in the morning. I promise you it will still be there if you look at it in an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours. This sense of instantaneousness that makes the person sitting in front of you less important than what's on your phone, it's a societal sickness. And so know yourself and don't allow yourself to be manipulated and controlled by something that you have the illusion that you have control over.
Good segue, speaking about young people and Jewish identity. We'll just kind of turn into that. In light of your experience as a visiting scholar, what do you believe young American Jews are most at risk of losing if they don't deeply connect with their heritage? And what role can we as supporters of Jewish National Fund USA play in fostering these connections, especially when it comes to understanding Israel's importance to our Jewish future?
Okay, I'm really glad you asked this. Here's the first thing I want to say. I'm going on March of the Living this year. But yes, and March of the Living is incredibly important, and that's why I'm doing it. But if you say to me, I can only take a Jewish kid one place, Auschwitz or Tel Aviv, I say Tel Aviv. I want them to see not what was done to the Jews, but what the Jews have done. Getting kids to Israel changes the way they think about Israel and about Judaism, because it's really remarkable what we have done out of this tiny, arid patch of land in the Middle East. And I don't have to tell you, like, what it is to persuade the desert to bloom, since that's practically JNF's slogan, but it is incredible what the Jewish people have done with this place. And there are so many Jews, young and old, who've gone to Italy 20 times, and yet, despite the fact that they are the first Jews in thousands of years that get to go to a Jewish state, they can't hop on a different plane and go to Israel instead of going again to see the canals of Venice or to see, I don't know, pick the Seine or the Thames, or those are wonderful places. I have nothing against Europe, except all the things I have against Europe. But apart from those, I have nothing. But my God, how can you not see what we have done? It's first of all miraculous, and second of all, it's a fantastic place to visit. And so that is the first thing I would say, is that the young people really have to see Israel. And secondly, you want to know what the most important thing for young people to see is? Older people caring. Because I want you to know, like, every time I speak to teachers, I always tell them, that kid in the back who's not paying attention to you, that's the kid in 20 years who's going to come up to you and say, I never forgot when you said this. And you didn't even know that they heard a word you said. But it's what the Kotzker Rebbe says about the Shema. He says, these words should be al levavecha, on your heart. And he says, why on your heart? Aren't they supposed to be in your heart? And his answer is yes, but hearts aren't always open. And so if you put the words on your heart, that is, maybe your kid doesn't see your example now, but if you said it now and it's on their heart, the day may come when you will be surprised that all of a sudden it's in their heart. So a part of what I want for younger people is for them to see older people that they can say, okay, I understand that Judaism excites and animates and moves this person, and maybe one day I'll be that too.
Great. And as continuing the conversation of young Jewish people and speaking to elders and emphasizing building over destruction and from our past and looking to the future, during your recent talk at Vanderbilt, you described the necessity of unity across Jewish communities, stating that our bonds are stronger than our differences. What actions can we take now, individually and through organizations, to actively build these bonds and work together towards a thriving Jewish future?
I had thought about talking about this during my talk, but can't say everything. So I have good news and bad news. I have doleket. I have the pain and also the joy of Jewish history to tell you about unity, and it's the same thing. Here's the thing about Jewish unity. It never existed. Never in Jewish history were Jews unified. We have this mythical idea, look at the desert. Were we unified in the desert? There were rebellions in the desert. The North and the South were together for 2 kings. That's basically it. David and Solomon, then they broke apart, never to be. That's why you have 10 lost tribes. Why do you have 10 lost tribes? Because the Jews couldn't get along with each other. That's true. Hanukkah is in part about the Jews not getting along with each other. So take some comfort in the idea that it's not like all of our grandparents always got along and we don't. They didn't either. But when the moment came that there was some kind of serious need, serious threat, serious mission, they somehow managed to get together. In Soviet Jewry, when it was important for Soviet Jewry to be freed, the American Jewish community, right, left, center, Orthodox, conservative, reform, secular, didn't matter. They said, we got to do this, and we did it together. It was an amazing accomplishment. Let me tell you something that Elie Wiesel, of blessed memory, that remarkable man, when he came to our synagogue for the 100th anniversary, and I was complaining to him a little bit, not that I would never complain, but I was just noting objectively that some education in the synagogue and practice and so on was not going exactly as I had hoped. He said, listen, David, when I left Auschwitz, we had 3 impossible dreams. One was that there would be a state of Israel. Another was that we would free Soviet Jewry. And the third was that we would revitalize Jewish life. He said, we accomplished the first 2. We have absolutely no right to despair of accomplishing the third. And when you think about it that way, when you think about what we've done, are we going to do it always together? No, we're always going to have internecine quarrels and differences, and they are certainly exacerbated in an age of polarization. But the key is try to listen, try to believe that if the other person believes something radically different from you, it's because they see the world differently, they understand things differently, and the best way to respond to that is to listen to them, to understand them. My friend Joseph Epstein said, Jews don't listen, they wait. So it's like, if you're talking to somebody who differs with you and you're just waiting for them to finish so that you can tell them what they really should think, it's not going to work. But if we have a genuine dialogue where we listen to each other, it really is possible. You don't have to agree, but it is possible, just like our sages did, to come to some different kind of commonality. Remember that when Hillel, and just 2 quick Hillel and Shammai things. One is, that's why the mezuzah is like this. right? Because Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, two commentators, one thought it should be like this, one like this, so we compromised. First of all, compromise is okay. But also in the Talmud, Hillel and Shammai debated all the time, and do you know why, according to the Talmud, the opinions of Hillel were favored more often? Because they showed respect to their opponents, because they put Shammai's arguments before their own. In other words, even in an argument, decency matters. It really matters. So.
In parts of that answer, you touched on modern history and our biblical history. This is a very rabbinical-friendly question while you're here and we have
Good.
you. In what ways can Jewish history, our collective story of resilience and adaptation, provide guidance or inspiration for American Jews as they confront modern challenges?
So I think that for American Jews in particular, because we have such wide vistas of action, right? There are two real challenges, one individual and one communal. Let's start with the individual. The individual challenge is to really be able to have the courage to stand up in one or another way as a Jewish person in a society where that is countercultural. And the fact that you didn't do it today doesn't mean you can't do it tomorrow. Like Judaism is all about self-transformation. Remember, our central story where we got our name is about Jacob wrestling with the angel. And what does Jacob say when the angel is about to leave? He says, I won't let you leave until you bless me. Now, as a rabbi, I've received lots of requests for blessings. They're always what? Health, children, success. But what does the angel say to Jacob? Your name is no longer Jacob, now it is Israel. If I ever said to somebody who asked me for a blessing, your name is no longer Fred, now it's Seymour, they would say, what kind of blessing is that? But the point is, the angel is blessing him with self-transformation, with the possibility of being a different person tomorrow from the person they were today. So don't limit yourself by saying, I'm the kind of person who would never, because you're the kind of person, like all of us, who has a soul that is capable of infinite possibilities, because after all, you're in the image of God, and therefore you have a bit of eternity in you. Second, as a community, recognize that really the Jewish community, despite its relative tiny, the fact that we are really a speck on history, we really can do extraordinary and miraculous things together. And believe in the coalesced power of the community, not only because we can do it as Jews, but also because, again, to thank so many who are here who are not Jews, because we have allies who will stand side by side and look in the same direction. Every time I marry a couple, almost every time, I try to make that distinction. The two ways that every couple has to stand and that all people have to stand is both looking at each other and also standing side by side and looking in the same direction. And we have a lot of people who share our vision of a strong Jewish community, strong Western civilizational values, a strong future for our children, and a place in the world where really, as the prophet said, you know, everybody can cultivate their own fig and fine tree, and none shall be afraid, which was precisely what George Washington said to the Jewish community in his initial speech to us at Newport. And I remind you, by the way, when Washington did that, just so you should remember what I said before, he spoke at that synagogue because he'd been invited by multiple synagogues, because none of them could agree who Washington should come and speak to, right? There never was like one unified Jewish voice. And finally, Washington said, look, I can't speak to all these different Jews. Give me one place. But when he did, what he said to us was, you belong here. And we've been here since.
I think we have about time for one, maybe two questions.
Okay.
we have record-breaking numbers in this room of JNF futures and all of the college students here, which is fantastic. Speaking to them specifically, what are some key factors in engaging your younger generations meaningfully, especially those who may feel distanced from traditional Jewish life or disengaged from organized religion?
So first of all, I'm going to get a chance to speak to the college students at 9:30 tonight, so I look forward to that, even though I will be bleary-eyed. But what I would say is, I know that we have an image of Judaism as frozen in amber, that it always was a certain way, and now we're not that way anymore. But the truth is that there have been so many Judaisms in Jewish history, and so many reinventions in Jewish history, and so many of the things that you think of have existed from time immemorial are in fact inventions in part of the modern world. And I could give you many, many examples. But just to give you a simple example, we all think of the long black coat of the Chassid as something that Moses wore, but in fact it was the dress of 18th century Polish noblemen. But then it became Jewish. And when something becomes Jewish, we claim it as our own. And this is a great thing. It is a great thing. Do you know that the names Moses and Pinchas and Aaron and Hophni, they're Egyptian names. They're not Jewish names. And that in the Talmud there's a Rabbi Yishmael and a Rabbi Aristobulus. Those are not Jewish names. We always took from the culture around us and we reshaped it and we made it Jewish. Our kids can do that too. As long as they understand that you don't have to do exactly what we did in the places where we did, and maybe you don't like the synagogue that we built, but build your own. If we empower them instead of disapproving of them, if we say to them, look, you can do for your generation as we did for ours, this is part of the great strength of the Jewish tradition, right? That in every generation, a Jew is supposed to see themselves as having come forth from Egypt. In other words, they're supposed to see the tradition as new. Remember that in the Amidah, when we say the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the classical Hasidic comment on that is, why don't you just be economical and say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And the answer is because it was a different God to all three of them. Because every human being has a unique relationship to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to God. So if we say to our children, okay, maybe this doesn't work for you, but you have the spiritual power within you to generate something in the Jewish tradition that is new because it is infinite. Our tradition is as broad as the world, right? That's why the Torah was given in a desert, the rabbis tell us, because it's open to the entire world. So I think that part of it is we have spent too much time assuming they don't walk along the tracks that we lay down for them, but if you allow people in part to find their own way, I know there are 3 minutes left, so let me tell you one quick Hasidic story. So,
and one more question too.
And one question. So very fast Hasidic story. Two Hasidim were products of the same rabbi. One of them exactly followed his rabbi's teachings, and the other went off his own way. And they met later in life, and the one who exactly followed the teaching said, I'm so upset with you. Why didn't you follow the teachings of our great rabbi? And he said, and the second one said, I did it better than you. He grew up and left his teacher, and I grew up and left mine. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
That's great.
That was 30 seconds.
Side note, unless I've been telling people the wrong thing and I Googled it, my middle name's Alexander, which is when Alexander the Great went through. And I'm going to shorten this question, and I think it's a great way to leave off. Is there an emergency? For a quick response, what role does the relationship with Israel play in the future of American Jewry?
Okay. Anybody who thinks that Israel is not central to the Jewish tradition ought to maybe read the Bible, or look at a prayer book, or finish a Passover Seder, or, I mean, of course, Israel, people who did not live before there was a state of Israel don't realize how much Israel changes the consciousness of being an American Jew. It makes everything different. And we who live, you know, there were 2.5 tribes, Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Menashe, who said to Moses, we don't want to go into the land. We want to stay outside the land because we like this pasturing outside the land better. And you know what Moses said to them? You can stay outside the land, but you have to fight for the land. And that's what I feel about American Judaism. We have a right to stay in America, but only if we fight for the land. So let me just close by saying I am so enormously grateful that you're here. I'm grateful to my friend Russell for having invited me to come and speak to you. And really, God bless Israel and the Jewish people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Michael Blank. I serve on the National Board of JNF-USA as Assistant Vice President for Investments. On behalf of all of us, I want to say a heartfelt thank you to Rabbi Wolpe for your leadership, spiritual insights, and moral clarity. Our Zionist movement has continued to prevail because of individuals like you. And we appreciate your inspiring words and the positive spirit you've brought to our global conference for Israel. Friends, coming up at 3:15, we have several inspiring sessions for you to choose from: civil defense and the security of our homeland, international law and geopolitical issues in the Middle East, employment and economic development in Israel's north and south, why here, why now, the new anti-Semitism, hashtag Zionism, pro-Israel stories from the social media trenches, Jewish National Fund USA playing a vital role in moving population to Israel's north and south. Please consult your programs for the room assignments for each. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.